other very important roles. So Muhammad was actually taking measures to tackle racial inequalities. Not merely saying, yeah, I'm not racist, we're good. Taking measures. The MCC is doing this through its many phases of social justice. And I also want to share what Muhammad said in his final sermon. So we're fast forwarding a little bit. I'm going to kind of hop around his life a little bit. The year is 632. Muhammad is not in great health. He has the entirety of the Ummah. For those who may not be familiar with Ummah, it's an Arabic term essentially referring to nation. And this is it. Muhammad gives his final calling, his final message. And you can look this up. You can Google the farewell sermon and actually read the text. It's a fairly short document. One of the things he advocated for was the equality of women, which is obviously exhibited here at the MCC. But Prophet Muhammad also said, and I'm paraphrasing here, an Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, white has no superiority over white, black have no superiority over non-black, except in piety and in good action. Now, when I came across the farewell sermon the first time I heard that, I immediately thought of one of my boyhood role models, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I remember in 4th grade in the suburbs of Boston, there was one book that I was always, probably the only book I was taking out of the library, and it was about Dr. King. And in 1963, Dr. King, in Washington, D.C., in front of the Lincoln Memorial, essentially says, and I'm paraphrasing again, I hope that one day my children will grow up in a society where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And it's amazing, it's how these match up. So compassion through adversity. Let's go to the year 622 now. So Muhammad and the Muslims have their second major migration. They move from Mecca to the city of Yathrib, which was later renamed Medina. And it's Medina today. Muhammad was recognized as Al-Amin, the trustworthy. He was a just mediator, a rational man, a sane man, a man of judgment. The tribes of Yathrib, most of which were Jewish and pagan, needed Muhammad's help because they couldn't figure out what they were doing. Generations-long conflict, war, bloodshed. They couldn't figure it out. Muhammad comes in as the lead negotiator, almost like a diplomat, trying to figure out, well, what are we going to do with this big mess that we have? So I like to imagine this in my head. What would be the first thing Muhammad would do when he sees this type of conflict? Right? Let's bring people together. Let's sit them around a table and let's have a discussion. Let's talk about how we can move forward. Coming out of this interaction between Muhammad and the Muslims and the Jews and the pagan is an extraordinary political document called the Constitution of Medina. This is also easily Googleable. I just created a word on Google. Googleable. I encourage you to read this document. It's a political treaty that provided, under the leadership of Muhammad, Jews and pagans, the following things that we as Americans are very lucky to have: freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to own property, the right to assembly, and multiple other things. This was a revolutionary idea because the entirety of the Arabian Peninsula was steeped in tribalism, in this racism that I had previously mentioned. Muhammad creates what I've referred to as a civic nation. A civic nation. When America is at its best, it is a civic nation. It is a nation that is all of its citizens are united not by blood, ancestry, race, ethnicity, religion, all the things that could potentially divide us. What makes us American and part of the same community are political rights. Right? So we're talking about moving beyond and transcending this idea that a nation is only for one group of people, or a community is only for one group of people. That is literally the opposite of what I see in front of me with all of this diversity. This, in many ways, was Muhammad's vision for his community, for his ummah. Now, that was 622. Let's move to the year 630. Muhammad is emerging as a statesman. As I mentioned when I first started, this is a man of many different hats. And he's sending out messages to various leaders in the region. There's one city called Najran, which is located in southern Saudi Arabia and northern on the border of Yemen. The Christians of Najran had been in the southern Arabian Peninsula for hundreds of years. And in the time right before Muhammad came to this world, the Christians of Najran were being fiercely persecuted by a tribe called the Himyarites. Sorry, now I'm getting into the nitty-gritty details of the history. I encourage you, if you're interested in some of this, check out some of my scholarship. So these Christians were being persecuted. Muhammad sends them a message saying, we would like to host you in Medina to form a bond, a partnership. Basically trying to get these two nations on the same playing field. They're trying to be allies, for lack of a better term. Now, the early Islamic sources tell us that when the Christians of Najran got to Masjid al-Nabawi, so the main mosque in Medina, the center of Islam, Christians and Muslims engaged in a 3-day dialogue, much of which focused on the nature of Christology. Talk about one of the most loaded potential topics for Christians and Muslims to talk about, which is another lecture. But we know that there was a civil conversation. I mean, think about it. It lasted for 3 days. Things must have been going pretty well. If it hadn't, it would have ended after the first day. There was a civil discourse, an interfaith dialogue that was seeking understanding, seeking community. You know, I must say a lot of the misperceptions that we have between our various communities today, I believe is largely due to lack of encounter, lack of actually talking to people. So Muhammad knew that you have to engage with people. Now, in addition to the Christology, my favorite part of the story, and again, this is linked to very sound early Islamic sources. The Christians of Najran were actually welcomed inside Masjid al-Nabawi to pray. So Christians actually given the space in a mosque to pray. Now even today, that's a radical idea for people. Not just for Muslims allowing Christians to pray in a mosque, but for Muslims to go to a church and pray. So what was Muhammad, what message was he sending in doing that? And I think it really boils down to hospitality. You know, treat others the way you want to be treated. Be a good host, right? Serve strangers. Make them feel warm. Make them feel comfortable. And I think that's quite critical too. What message was he sending? He was sending this fundamental principle that hospitality is an act of faith. And this is certainly something the MCC is capturing not only in word, but in spirit and in action. I also want to say something about Muhammad's ability to trust others. What strong community exists when people within that community don't trust each other? Right? What is possible without trust? Nothing, really. The year is 615 now. We're certainly not going in a linear approach. We're really going through the sociological concepts that I have in my head. 615, the Muslims are being persecuted in Mecca by the Quraysh, Muhammad's own people, if you can believe that. They say no prophet is ever welcomed in his hometown. Probably true. Muhammad knows in 615 that there is a Christian kingdom across the Red Sea in Abyssinia, in modern-day Ethiopia. And he encourages a small group of Muslims. I mean, think about this. He asked them to leave Mecca, leave everything behind. Your homes, your possessions, your family, your friends, all your comfort. Cross the Red Sea, and it's there that you will be welcomed by the Christian king of Abyssinia. And when the Muslims were actually in Abyssinia, in Aqsa, a similar dialogue took place between the Christians and Muslims. But King Ibn Atra, the Christian king, refused to give the Muslims back to the Quraysh because the Quraysh had followed the Muslims to Abyssinia. The Quraysh wanted the Muslims to come back to Mecca where they would ultimately probably be killed. Now the reason why I bring this up, this isn't necessarily Muhammad being hospitable towards Christians, but Muhammad had a leap of faith here, saying that just because these people don't share the same religious identity as us, doesn't mean you can't trust them. So he had a leap of faith here, encouraging his people to engage with the other and to trust the other. As I mentioned, what good in our communities can exist without this fundamental component of trust? And I'd also like to end here on another story that has to do with a Jewish funeral procession. And I really think that this captures the true essence of Muhammad's heart and mind, the true essence of the Islamic faith and the beauty of it, but also our common humanity, and something that I think we can all feel in our heart and in our minds. So Muhammad is with some of his followers in Medina, and this group of people, Muhammad being in there, saw a Jewish funeral procession. Right, so like a caravan of people coming down the street. And Muhammad sees that it's a Jewish funeral procession, and he stands to honor that Jewish soul, just as we stood earlier to honor the flag. He stood, and one of his followers said, "Hey, what are you doing? This is a Jewish person. I don't understand. Not part of our tribe, not part of our religious community." And Muhammad responded to this individual, quite calmly, and saying, basically asked the question: is this person not a human soul? This person is this person lived, they loved, they were loved, they had family, they had a life. So Muhammad understood the sanctity of every life. That's what made him a great man, perhaps one of the most influential men to have ever existed. So to wrap up again, anti-racism, we're talking about what does it take to build a good community? Anti-racism, allyship, trust, hospitality, and as I started with, the ink of the scholar is more sacred than the blood of the martyr, knowledge. And let me leave you with this. I promise I'll leave stage now. Let me leave you with this. When I talk about knowledge, I'm not merely talking about the knowledge for a traditional kind of academic setting, of books and peer-reviewed journal articles. All that stuff is quintessentially important. But I know for me, the most powerful source of knowledge is having memories from places like this, where you have relationships with people. You had a conversation with someone that kind of disrupts all of these misperceptions and these narratives that we see in our society. So we need to do more of this. MCC and Dr. Shalaby, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to all be here, and certainly to recognize the great efforts that you have been engaging in. So thank you, Dr. Shalaby, and thank you all for listening. Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much.